Imagine a man who challenged everything he had been taught since childhood, a thinker who alone stood against his community, his religion, and even the fear of censorship to defend a worldview that few dared to even consider. That man was Baruch, Spinoza. If philosophy were a Western, Spinoza would be the lone gunslinger, the one who walks against the crowd, unafraid to duel with the most powerful ideas of his time. He did not seek fame, did not want followers, nor did he crave recognition. His only commitment was to the truth, and for that he paid a high price. Centuries later, one of the greatest geniuses of science, Albert Einstein, when asked if he believed in God, replied, "I believe in Spinoza's God." But what does that mean? What kind of God did Spinoza conceive? And why were his ideas so revolutionary that they were banned and feared? Today we will dive into the life and thought of this philosopher who challenged religion, redefined freedom, and influenced everything from science to modern psychology. Get ready, because this story might change the way you see the world and yourself. To understand Spinoza, we need to go back to the 17th century, to a vibrant but religiously tense Amsterdam. He was born in 1632 into a family of Sephardic Jews who had fled the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. His ancestors escaped persecution, only to find a new kind of prison, a community that, though free from the church's fire, still lived under strict rules and unquestionable dogmas. From an early age, Spinoza was educated in the Jewish tradition. He learned Hebrew, studied the Torah and rabbinic texts, and was expected to follow the path of a religious scholar. But there was something different about him. While his peers accepted the scriptures as absolute truths, Spinoza asked questions. Dangerous questions. He wanted to know, if God is perfect, why is the world so imperfect? If the Bible is the divine word, why are there so many contradictions? If God intervenes in history, why do so many injustices continue to happen? These doubts were not welcome. The Jewish community in Amsterdam, though relatively tolerant, could not afford to harbor a heretic. They were already foreigners in a land that accepted them with restrictions, and any deviation could put everyone at risk. But Spinoza was not one to conform. He began studying on his own, delving into the works of philosophers like Descartes and classical thinkers like Aristotle and the Stoics. And the more he learned, the more he realized that the answers he sought were not in religion, but in reason. The young Spinoza was about to cross a point of no return, and when he did, his life changed forever. Imagine being only 23 years old, and being declared a pariah by your own community, not just rejected, but officially banned, cursed in a public ritual, with words wishing for your memory to be erased from history. That is exactly what happened to Spinoza. His questioning of God, the Bible, and religious morality became unbearable for the leaders of the Jewish community in Amsterdam. He not only doubted the traditional interpretation of the scriptures, but dared to suggest that God was not a personal being, that he did not perform miracles, and that organized religion was, for the most part, an instrument of control based on fear. This was too dangerous. The Jewish community was already under the watchful eye of the Dutch Christian authorities, and a young man openly challenging established beliefs could put everyone at risk. So in 1656, the rabbis made a drastic decision. Spinoza was excommunicated, with a cherem, a kind of ultimate curse. The decree stated, "May he be cursed by day and cursed by night. May he be cursed when he lies down and cursed when he rises. May no one speak to him. May no one help him. May no one read his writings." Most people, when rejected in such a way, would try to repent, ask for forgiveness, find a way back. But Spinoza did the opposite. He saw his expulsion not as a tragedy, but as a liberation. Now, free from religious constraints, he could follow his own intellectual path without fear of reprisals. He abandoned the name Baruch, which means blessed in Hebrew, and began signing as Bento, the Latin version of his name. He left Amsterdam, lived modestly, earning a living as a lens grinder, and dedicated himself entirely to philosophy. What he lost in social status, he gained in freedom of thought, and it was this freedom that led him to develop one of the boldest and most transformative philosophies in history. Now imagine a God who is not sitting on a heavenly throne, judging and intervening in the world, a God who does not hear prayers, does not perform miracles, and does not choose favorites. For Spinoza, God was not a being separate from the universe. God was the universe itself. This was the most revolutionary and dangerous idea of his philosophy. He proposed that God and nature were the same thing, a single infinite substance that manifests in everything that exists. This means that everything, from the stars in the sky to the thoughts in your mind, is part of this same divine reality. This view, known as pantheism, directly challenged traditional religions. If God is not a personal being, then there is no room for miracles, for a divine plan, or for a final judgment. The world is not governed by supernatural wills, but by immutable natural laws. And more, if everything is part of God, then good and evil do not exist in an absolute sense. What we call evil is nothing more than a consequence of our ignorance about how the universe works. Suffering, according to Spinoza, comes from our resistance to reality, from our attempt to fight against natural laws instead of understanding them. This idea was so radical that many accused him of atheism. But in reality, Spinoza did not deny God. He simply redefined him. For him, God was not a being who demanded worship, but rather the very structure of reality. To know God, therefore, was not to pray or follow commandments, but to understand the laws that govern the world and ourselves. This vision would forever change philosophy, science, and even spirituality. And centuries later, it would inspire none other than Albert Einstein, who saw the mathematical order of the universe as the true face of God. But if God and nature are the same thing, where does the human being fit into this equation? Do we have free will, or are we just pieces of a cosmic mechanism? Spinoza had an answer to this, and it may be more unsettling than you imagine. Have you ever felt like you were in complete control of your choices? That every decision you make is the result of your own will? Spinoza would say that this is nothing more than an illusion. For him, free will, as we commonly imagine it, simply does not exist. Our actions, thoughts, and emotions do not arise out of nowhere. They are the inevitable result of an infinite chain of causes and effects. Just as a stone thrown into the air does not choose where it will land, we also do not freely choose our desires and behaviors. This idea was a direct affront to the dominant thinking of the time, especially to René Descartes' dualism, which separated mind and body as two distinct substances. Spinoza rejected this division. For him, mind and body are merely two manifestations of the same reality, two sides of the same coin. What happens in the body has a reflection in the mind, and vice versa. This means that our thoughts are not separate entities floating in a void, but rather expressions of the same natural laws that govern everything in the universe. If you feel anger, fear, or happiness, these emotional states do not arise by chance. They are determined by prior factors such as your biology, your environment, and your past experiences. But if everything is determined, where does freedom come in? Spinoza argues that true freedom does not lie in acting without causes, but in understanding the causes that move us. The more we understand what influences us, our impulses, our fears, our limitations, the more we can act rationally and in alignment with reality. In other words, we are not free to choose anything, but we can become freer by knowing the forces that determine us. It is like a sailor who cannot control the wind but can learn to navigate better. This view would profoundly influence modern psychology and neuroscience. Today, we know that much of our behavior is shaped by unconscious processes, neurological patterns, and conditioning that we do not even perceive. Spinoza had already intuited this centuries earlier, and this understanding of the human mind was not limited to philosophy. He also applied this logic to the study of society, politics, and religion, and his ideas were so dangerous that his most controversial book was immediately censored. Imagine writing a book so dangerous that it was immediately banned, persecuted, and placed on the list of forbidden works by the Catholic Church. That is exactly what happened with the theological political treatise, Spinoza's most controversial work. In this book, he did something unthinkable for his time. He treated the Bible not as a sacred text, but as a historical document full of errors, contradictions, and political influences. He argued that the scriptures were not written by God, but by men, and, like any human work, they were subject to mistakes and misinterpretations. But Spinoza did not stop there. He also attacked the idea that religion should control society. For him, faith should be a personal matter, and the state should not impose religious beliefs on anyone. He defended freedom of thought and expression, something extremely bold in a time when questioning religion could lead to death. His argument was simple but devastating. Fear is the foundation of organized religions. Religious leaders maintain their power by feeding people's insecurity, promising rewards in the afterlife, and threatening divine punishments. But for Spinoza, true freedom could only exist when people freed themselves from these illusions and sought rational knowledge. The reaction was immediate. The book was considered heretical, banned in several countries, and attacked by both Jews and Christians. Spinoza began living under constant threat, being called the most impious of philosophers. But even in the face of persecution, he never recanted. He refused academic positions that required him to moderate his ideas and continued living simply, polishing lenses to survive while writing his masterpiece, Ethics. If the theological political treatise was an attack on religious illusions, Ethics was his attempt to build a new path to human happiness and freedom, not based on faith but on a deep understanding of reality. And this work, published only after his death, would forever change the history of philosophy. Imagine a book that not only explains how the universe works, but also teaches how to live better within it. That was Spinoza's ambition when writing Ethics, his philosophical masterpiece. But he did not just want to present ideas, he wanted to demonstrate them with the precision of a mathematician. That is why he structured the book as a geometric treatise with definitions, axioms, and propositions, as if he were proving theorems about existence itself. And what did he discover? That the universe follows a necessary order, with no room for chance or arbitrary divine wills. Everything that happens, from the movement of planets to human emotions, obeys immutable natural laws. From this, Spinoza redefined the pursuit of happiness. For him, true joy does not come from hope, faith, or the search for external rewards, but from a deep understanding of reality. The more we understand the world and ourselves, the less we are enslaved by blind passions such as fear, hatred, and envy. He also dismantled the idea that morality comes from divine commandments. For Spinoza, good is not what a religion declares to be right, and evil is not what it condemns. The moral criterion is simple. What strengthens our existence and makes us more rational is good. What weakens us and makes us slaves to destructive emotions is bad. And what does this mean in practice? That freedom is not about doing whatever we want, but about wanting what truly strengthens us. When we act driven by fear or ignorance, we are prisoners of forces we do not control. But when we understand the causes of our emotions and desires, we can act more consciously and autonomously. This vision was so revolutionary that Spinoza knew that if he published the book during his lifetime, he would face even harsher persecution. That is why Ethics was only published after his death. But even so, his ideas could not be contained. The book was banned, but it circulated clandestinely, influencing generations of philosophers, scientists, and thinkers. And in the end, Spinoza's great lesson was simple but profound. Happiness does not come from expecting the world to adjust to our desires, but from understanding the world as it truly is and living in harmony with that reality. But who was the man behind these ideas? How did he spend his final years knowing that his words could change the world, but that he himself would never see that impact? Spinoza never sought fame, wealth, or recognition. While other philosophers of his time competed for academic positions and influential patrons, he chose a simple and discreet life. He refused teaching offers at universities because he did not want to compromise his intellectual freedom. He preferred to live modestly, polishing lenses to survive while dedicating his time to thought and writing. But this choice came at a cost. The work with lenses, which required inhaling fine glass particles, likely contributed to the worsening of his health. Gradually, his physical condition deteriorated. He suffered from tuberculosis, an incurable disease at the time, and his fragile health accompanied him until the end. Even so, he never stopped writing. Until his last days, he continued refining his ideas, corresponding with other thinkers, and organizing his manuscripts. He knew that his works were too dangerous to be published during his lifetime, but he hoped that after his death, his words would find a way. On February 21, 1677, at the age of 44, Spinoza passed away quietly in his home, without fanfare, without grand ceremonies. His body was buried simply, without honors, without monuments. But his death did not mark the end of his ideas. Shortly after, his friends gathered his writings and published ethics and other unpublished texts. As expected, his works were immediately banned, but that did not stop them from circulating clandestinely. And so the man who lived in the shadows, rejected by his own community and ignored by many of his contemporaries, became one of the most influential philosophers in history. His legacy was not erased. On the contrary, his ideas continued to grow, shaping philosophy, science, and even politics in the centuries that followed. And ironically, while many of his critics were forgotten, Spinoza became immortal through his thought. But what was the true impact of his ideas? How did a man who lived in isolation manage to influence everything from the French Revolution to modern physics? Few philosophers were as rejected in life and, at the same time, as revered after death as Spinoza. His ideas, initially seen as dangerous and heretical, ended up shaping modern thought in ways he could never have imagined. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment, the intellectual movement that challenged the power of the Church and defended reason as humanity's guide, found in Spinoza a precursor. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot drew from his ideas on freedom of thought and the separation of religion and politics. Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers of modernity, once said that Spinoza was one of the few thinkers who truly understood the depth of metaphysics. Meanwhile, Hegel, another giant of philosophy, declared, "Either you are a Spinozist or you are not a true philosopher." But perhaps Spinoza's most famous admirer was Albert Einstein. When asked if he believed in God, Einstein replied, "I believe." In Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and actions of men. For Einstein, Spinoza's vision of God as the very structure of the universe made more sense than any traditional religious explanation. His theory of relativity, which revealed the mathematical order of the cosmos, seemed to echo Spinoza's idea that everything follows immutable natural laws. Centuries before psychoanalysis, Spinoza had already anticipated one of the fundamental principles of modern psychology. Our emotions are not mysterious forces, but natural phenomena that can be understood and controlled. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, acknowledged that the idea that we are driven by unconscious impulses was already present in Spinoza's philosophy. More recently, neuroscientists like Antonio Damasio have demonstrated that the relationship between mind and body described by Spinoza is surprisingly aligned with what modern science has discovered about how the brain functions. In the field of politics, Spinoza was one of the first to defend the separation of church and state and freedom of expression as fundamental principles for a just society. His ideas directly influenced the thinkers who helped shape modern democracies. Today, when we talk about a secular state, about the importance of reason in decision-making, and about the need to understand our emotions to live better, we are, in a way, repeating Spinoza's lessons. What makes Spinoza so relevant even today is that he did not just theorize about the world. He gave us tools to understand it and live better within it. And now the big question is, what can we learn from him? How can his ideas help us see reality more clearly and find a path to true freedom? Take a deep breath for a moment and think, how much of your life is truly guided by conscious choices, and how much is just an automatic reaction to fears, desires, and impulses you don't even notice? Spinoza teaches us that true freedom is not about doing whatever we want at any moment, but about understanding what drives us. He invites us to look at reality without illusions, without clinging to comfortable but false beliefs. And that is a challenge, because many times we prefer to believe that we have absolute control over our lives, that the universe has a specific purpose for us, or that there is an invisible force protecting us from chaos. But Spinoza tells us, the universe was not made to serve us, it simply is. At first, this may seem cold, but in reality, it is liberating. Because instead of waiting for the world to adjust to our desires, we can learn to live in harmony with it. We can stop fighting against what we cannot change and focus on what is truly within our reach, our understanding, our actions, and our way of dealing with reality. He also teaches us that happiness does not come from blind hope or the pursuit of external rewards, but from knowledge. The more we understand the world and ourselves, the less we are enslaved by destructive emotions like fear, envy, and hatred. And perhaps the most powerful lesson from Spinoza is this: we do not need dogmas to find meaning in life. We can see the beauty of the universe without needing a God who judges us. We can find purpose in existence itself, in the natural order of things, in the pursuit of understanding. Baruch Spinoza lived a simple life, without wealth, without recognition. In his time, and died young, rejected by his own community. But his ideas have crossed centuries and shaped the way we think about God, freedom, the human mind, and reality itself. He showed us that true happiness is not in comfortable illusions, but in a deep understanding of the world, that we are not puppets of an arbitrary fate, but part of a natural order that we can learn to navigate. And that freedom is not doing whatever we want, but understanding what moves us and acting with wisdom. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of Spinoza's ideas impacted you the most? Do you believe we can live without illusions, or are they necessary for life? Leave your comment. I read them all and want to know your opinion. If this video made you reflect, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next content. And if you know someone interested in philosophy and personal development, share this video. Who knows, this message might reach someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next video. Until then, keep seeking knowledge because, as Spinoza would say, understanding is the true key to freedom.